CNN political analyst David Gregory, CNN politics reporter and editor-at-large Chris Cillizza, and politics editor at The Root, Jason Johnson. David Gregory, an open letter to the Deputy Attorney General by the New York Times editorial board. Rod Rosenstein, whether he likes it or not, is at the center of this move. He is being used by the White House as a rationale for why they removed Comey, despite the flood of indications that this was not about Hillary Clinton's investigation, but about Russia. They call on him to appoint a special counsel to restore Americans' faith in the administration of justice, and to do so and to check the president, even if it costs him his job. How important is Rosenstein right now since that memo he decided to write?
Critically important, because Rosenstein, who has a great reputation, the former U.S. attorney in Baltimore, is seen widely among career prosecutors and law enforcement folks as highly credible, only on the job for a couple of weeks. And the reporting here is critical, right? The White House is saying that he acted on his own, that Rosenstein acted on his own to bring up concerns about Comey's performance, and that led to his firing by the president once Rosenstein and the Attorney General recommended that. I don't believe that. I want to hear from Rosenstein himself about what happened. Did he act on his own accord? And does he stand behind the firing of Comey under these circumstances? I mean, let's just pull back and look at what our reporting here at CNN and on other outlets is telling us. The President of the United States, someone we know to be impulsive, undisciplined, inexperienced, and lacking temperament, decided because he was mad at the FBI director because he wasn't loyal enough and was aggressive in pursuing this investigation that he would fire him. This is precisely why you have an FBI director who is in place for 10 years, to be immune from that kind of political pique on the part of the president, especially when there's an investigation bearing down on him. So the rationale doesn't make sense. The White House explanations do not have credibility. And even though there is a basis for firing Jim Comey because of his conduct of the Clinton email scandal, this thing has been horribly handled.
Chris, there is another tidbit about Rod Rosenstein that we need to explore. The Washington Post has reporting this morning. CNN has not yet been able to confirm it or match it. However, it's that Rod Rosenstein was so unhappy about being thrown under the bus, having this decision to fire Comey pinned on him, which was one of the narratives coming out of the White House, that he threatened to resign. So today we're left with, why didn't he resign? What was said to him that made him feel comfortable in the role of catalyst for all of this, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to just go back and remember, we're now 30 plus hours into this. There's probably been 10 different stories offered by the White House as to why exactly Jim Comey was fired. That's stunning. I think Rod Rosenstein saw the writing on the wall here, and I trust my former colleagues at the Washington Post saw the writing on the wall here and thought, wait a minute. This has scapegoat written all over it. You know, I'm the guy who's going to be the fall guy in all of this, and believe that, you know, he and Trump had a conversation on Monday. It is clear that Trump was unhappy with Comey as the FBI director and was looking for an underpinning to, you know, sort of the backbone to say, this is why I did it. It's not going to say, I fired him because he wasn't loyal enough to me, but he was looking for that underpinning. And it looks like Rosenstein gave him that underpinning. Just one more point, David mentioned this. The idea that Donald Trump fired or wanted James Comey fired because he was too much of his own man, isn't that the point? Right, and that's why we have an FBI director. That's why these people, that's like saying, that Supreme Court justice, they're not loyal enough to me. That's the whole point. That's why we have these separations of power. That's why you have people who, because no one is above the law, because that's why the whole system exists.
Right. I mean, look, I'm sure that Rosenstein is trying to figure out how to deal with the fallout from this situation, because that memo on its own face, you know, there are people who are cited in it, whether it's Alberto Gonzalez or Ayers, who worked for Bush. Ayers said the reasoning is a sham in that memo. Alberto Gonzalez came out and said, yeah, the timing is really weird here that's going on. So the bases on that, in that memo are getting some criticism, and that's on Rosenstein. But he is going to be saved, I think, Jason Johnson, here from any intense scrutiny, because of how obvious it is that this wasn't about the Clinton investigation. And the best evidence of that is the president's own letter. That second paragraph where he says something we have been unable to verify with any source at the FBI and anyone who knows James Comey, which is that it was communicated to the president on at least 3 occasions that he is not part of the investigation. One, why would he put that in there if it's not about the Russia investigation? And two, what does it mean if the president is lying or that that's not true and he was never told that?
Right. It just seems, Chris, it seems really unlikely that James Comey would have a sit down with President Trump and say, you're not under investigation. What good investigator does that? That doesn't make any sense when it's an ongoing investigation. We know the president has a tendency to lie. But even going back to Rosenstein, and I pity him in a way in this situation. If your boss comes to you and says, look, tell me how to do something. Right? It's his job to provide that information. But it's sort of like, OJ, I'm not saying I did it, but here's how I would if you had to. And so, he didn't want to end up getting blamed for this ultimately because he still has to walk through the hallways of the FBI and maintain relations with career investigators. And he wants to make sure that the blood is not on his hands as the scandal spreads.
But it's also important to remember that, there was a legitimate beef, and I'm sure Rosenstein felt that with how Comey behaved himself, because he is among those career people who thought this was outrageous the way Comey behaved. But again, you have to then look at the broader context of why is Trump wanting to do this now? Why is he so white hot about this now? Imagine in the president's thinking, I'm sure he thought, okay, I'm listening to Comey here. This guy feels bad about all the criticism he's getting over Hillary Clinton and how he handled that. So he's going to just go crazy on this Russia investigation, and he's never going to let me alone. We got to get rid of this guy. I mean, imagine a thought process like that. And Bret Stephens has got a great op-ed in the Times this morning, says the tells are easy with Donald Trump. He mentions the 3 times that he claims that he wasn't the source of an investigation, which, by the way, even if that were true, could change. Then he's obsessed about this investigation because it's sort of taking over everything else, only to be outdone by the president's own reaction and firing without a basis of Comey in this timing that it really threatens to undermine so much more of his presidency.
So, Chris, we have a new window into the president's thinking because there's this new Time magazine out. President Trump is on the cover, and there's a pretty insightful interview with him. So let's read some of it. This is about whether he was asked whether he thinks that his White House is too combative. Here's what he says. I think it is. It could be my fault. I don't want to necessarily blame, but there's a great meanness out there, and I'm surprised at. I'm surprised. It's funny today, Chris, because you hear him pivot there in the space of, 3 sentences.
That's what I was going to say. He both takes the blame and then blames the meanness in society in literally 1 paragraph. That's him. He just kind of says stuff. I do think he has it right in the first part of it, saying, could it be my fault? I think the infighting within his administration is clearly his fault because he set up a structure from the top down, from the top 4 people who, that's Reince Priebus, Kellyanne Conway, Jared Kushner, Steve Bannon. They all have amorphous roles. It's not clear who's in charge of what. He plays them off one another. He plays favorites. So he set that up. But then, and I know this is an inside media point, but it is illustrative, I think, of the broader issue within this White House. There were 30 people that the Washington Post talked to write their story about Comey. The New York Times talked to a dozen people. The Wall Street Journal, CNN. It is all White Houses leak. I have never seen a White House not only leak quantitatively, just the raw number, but also qualitatively. People who are saying, like, he was screaming, he was white hot. The image painted of him is not called not favorable, is to do him a favor. I think that's important, too. So he has a structure where he's not only isolated, but everyone seems to be positioning, some jumping off the ship. All of that stuff. 30 people who are willing to talk about how he mishandled the James Comey firing. That's remarkable.
Well, and David, look, what does that do? That is going to fuel a defensive posture by the president. I think it has been a pretty consistent question about how well served he is by the people around him. And this is a man who's used to doing things unilaterally. This is never a man who was known for building a strong team around him. He has his own mind. He has his own gut, and it's gotten him very far. The question is, can it take him from here to where he wants to be?
You know, anybody in his position is going to go through this incredible transition. You know, President Truman said when Eisenhower wanted to get into politics, he sort of said, oh, he's going to have a tough time. He's used to ordering people around, do this, go there. And then if he becomes president, he's going to see it's not so easy to deal with an entrenched bureaucracy in the government. Donald Trump has found that in spades. But you know what? I'm worried about meanness at my kid's school. What I'm worried about here is abuse of power and preservation of democratic ideals. And that is what President Trump ought to be thinking a little bit more about. The other piece of this that I think we have to add to the discussion, where is Congress? The news media is doing its job. We'll see if people like Rosenstein ultimately do their job. Where is Congress as a real check and balance? And I'm not talking about the Democrats, of course. It's Republicans, because right now Republicans are closing ranks, and that's going to be a big deal. It's going to help Trump a great deal unless there's some pushback to restore some of this appropriate separation. And I say that knowing full well this Russia investigation may turn up nothing at all. The president and his team may have done nothing at all inappropriate, but he's certainly acting suspiciously.
Jason, let me read for you another piece of this just released Time magazine article. This is about how the president considers deal-making in his past in business versus deal-making in Washington. He says it's never different. I think it's never different. It's always the same. You have to know your subject, and that would be the misconception of misconceptions for that. I mean, it's not that I always had health care for my company, but it's not that it was something that just wasn't high on my list. I had people that negotiated for my company, but in a short period of time, I understood everything there was to know about health care. And we did the right negotiating, and it's actually a very interesting subject. Now, look, you know what? He's not as great in print as he is when he speaks. It's harder to do a dramatic reading from his excerpts than to just listen to him. But you get the point, Jason.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to read Donald Trump, both psychologically and when he speaks, But I agree with him, Allison. It's key. He is running the presidency like he negotiated businesses. He's using our federal tax money as basically an ATM for his personal businesses. He has given security clearances to his children and turned the federal government into an internship for his kids. So yes, he is operating the government the way that he operated his business. The problem is he bankrupted four businesses. And I don't think that we want that to happen in the United States of America. And I think one of the other things that was really key that I noticed in this interview, the president is still unhealthily obsessed with Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. You are president of the United States. It's your job to lead this country forward. His obsession with beating and reminding people that he beat them at the expense of our national security and our economy is a very, very dangerous tendency. It's something I hope he, or at least his staff, reminds him he needs to get over and move forward.
Can I just, one note on healthcare real quick? I actually think it's interesting. I think he's rather pragmatic on healthcare, and I think his own experiences in his company, I'm sure he had generous healthcare benefits. I think what he's running into is an ideological fight between himself and conservatives who want the market to really take over as opposed to the government being the guarantor. And that's a fight that I don't think he's really waged within his own party and doesn't really realize is there.
Although Donald Trump, Chris, he wrote in his own book some years ago that he believed universal health care was the future.
I think he thinks that, but I do think he's a pragmatist, but I do think the telling part of that quote is, in a very short period of time, I learned everything there is to know about health care.
He didn't.
I mean, like, you're talking about a subject that people spend their careers learning on. I mean, I'm sure he got more up to speed on it, but you have to be confident to be president of the United States, confident in your own abilities. Barack Obama had that, no question. But that sort of insistence that he was able to take in all information as it relates to healthcare and then do a very good job in his own assessment. Again, that's the Donald Trump, that sentence is the Donald Trump presidency 110, I think, days in a nutshell.
Panel, thank you. Great to talk to all of you.
And look,